What you're about to hear will leave you speechless. This is the story of a 76-year-old nurse who was forced into retirement after 50 years of service, only to become the hospital's last hope when disaster struck on her final night. Dorothy's last shift comp. Dorothy's hands were trembling, not from age, but from the weight of injustice. For 5 decades, she had walked these hospital corridors, touched thousands of lives, and earned the respect of everyone who worked alongside her. But now, at 76, she had become unwanted. Dorothy said nothing. She simply nodded and walked out of that office. As she moved through the corridors, she felt the eyes of younger nurses watching her. Some looked sad, but none dared to speak up. Hospital politics had silenced them all. That morning, when head nurse Jennifer called her into the office, Dorothy knew what was coming. Jennifer was 30 years younger and had never shown Dorothy any respect. When the door opened, Dorothy met those cold, calculating eyes that had been watching her every move for months. Jennifer told her that her retirement needed to be voluntary. Hospital management wanted fresh blood. While Dorothy's experience was valuable, they believed she couldn't keep up with modern technology. This was her final warning. Her last shift would begin Friday night at 11 p.m. in the geriatric ward. With elderly patients, it seemed fitting to hospital management. Let the old nurse handle the old patients. The message was clear and cruel. When Dorothy got home that evening, her husband George was waiting with worried eyes. George knew about Dorothy's situation at the hospital. In their 52 years of marriage, he had never seen Dorothy so broken. Dorothy told him everything. Jennifer's condescending attitude, management's decision, the silence of younger nurses who knew this was wrong. George's face flushed red. He knew what Dorothy had accomplished at that hospital. He remembered countless crisis moments when Dorothy had literally saved the day. Friday night, when she arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere felt strange. Younger nurses looked at her differently. Some smiled apologetically. Everyone knew this was Dorothy's last night, but no one had the courage to say this was wrong. The geriatric ward was busy as usual. Elderly patients became more restless at night. Dorothy checked each room methodically. Mrs. Patterson's blood sugar, Mr. Rodriguez's heart medication, Mrs. Chen's sleep troubles. She knew them all, had memorized their stories. But Dorothy was determined. She would complete her final shift with dignity and leave quietly. She wouldn't cause problems for anyone. After 50 years, this was how her career would end. As the clock approached 2 a.m., Dorothy sat at the nursing station. Young nurse Katie approached and said she wanted to thank her. She had learned so much from Dorothy, and things would be harder without her guidance. But just then, the emergency alarm began blaring, that terrible sound that only rang during hospital-wide crises. Dorothy's heart raced. Her 50 years of experience told her exactly what this sound meant. Something catastrophic had happened, and now everyone would need Dorothy's expertise on her final night. Before we continue with this incredible story, hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable true stories that will restore your faith in human resilience. The alarm continued its piercing wail. Dorothy stood up instinctively, her body remembering decades of crisis response. Katie looked panicked, uncertain what to do. Over the intercom, a voice crackled with urgency, calling all available medical staff to the emergency department immediately. Dorothy looked toward the geriatric ward. Her patients needed monitoring, but that alarm meant lives were at stake elsewhere. She made a decision that would change everything. She told Katie to watch the ward and headed toward the emergency department. Dr. Martinez. The attending physician looked overwhelmed. Multiple ambulances had arrived simultaneously. A multi-car accident on the interstate had brought in 7 critical patients. 2 were children. The trauma teams were stretched beyond capacity. As Dorothy hurried through the corridors, she passed younger nurses running in the same direction. Their faces showed fear and confusion. Whatever had happened was beyond their training. In the emergency department, chaos reigned. But the real crisis was just beginning. The hospital's main computer system had crashed right when they needed it most. Digital patient records were inaccessible. Automated medication systems weren't functioning. Modern technology had failed them at the worst possible moment. Jennifer appeared beside Dr. Martinez, looking frantic. She was trying to organize care using printed backup forms, but the younger staff had never worked without digital systems. They were paralyzed by the technological failure. Dorothy surveyed the scene. Young nurses stood frozen, dependent on digital systems they couldn't access. Doctors were shouting orders, but coordination was breaking down. Without computer assistance, the efficient modern hospital had become chaotic. Dorothy watched a young nurse fumble with manual blood pressure equipment. Another struggled to calculate medication dosages without computer assistance. These were basic skills that Dorothy had mastered decades before computers existed. Her voice cut through the panic. Dorothy assigned specific nurses to patients, dictated medication calculations from memory, and established manual monitoring systems. Years of experience had taught her to think 10 steps ahead during crises. Dr. Martinez noticed Dorothy standing there. He knew her reputation but had heard she was retiring. Desperation overcame protocol. He approached Dorothy and asked if she could help coordinate the nursing staff. They needed someone who could work without technology. Dorothy nodded. This was exactly what she had trained for during her early years, when hospitals relied on skill, experience, and intuition rather than computers. She stepped into the chaos and began organizing the response. Dorothy faced an impossible choice: stay and coordinate the trauma response, or return to save a patient she had cared for personally. The emergency department needed her expertise, but Mrs. Patterson was dying. But then something shocking happened. Young nurse Katie came running from the geriatric ward. Mrs. Patterson had collapsed, and her blood sugar was dangerously low. Katie had followed emergency protocols, but the elderly woman wasn't responding to standard treatment. Jennifer saw Dorothy's hesitation and made a cutting remark. She told Dorothy to choose where she belonged, with the critical trauma patients or the dying elderly woman. It was a cruel test designed to diminish Dorothy's importance. Dorothy immediately implemented a treatment plan that combined her knowledge of geriatric care with old-school nursing intuition. She manually calculated precise medication adjustments and began a careful monitoring process that couldn't be found in any computer protocol. In Mrs. Patterson's room, Dorothy assessed the situation quickly. The woman's blood sugar was critically low, but something else was wrong. Dorothy recognized signs that the younger nurses had missed. Patterson was having an adverse reaction to a new medication that had been added to her regimen. Dorothy looked at Jennifer with decades of wisdom behind her eyes. She turned to Dr. Martinez and gave him detailed instructions for continuing the trauma response. Then she headed back to the geriatric ward, knowing that Mrs. Patterson needed specialized care that only experience could provide. Mrs. Patterson's condition began stabilizing under Dorothy's care. Color returned to her face, and her vital signs improved. Katie watched in amazement as Dorothy performed what seemed like medical magic, using only experience and intuition. As she worked, Dorothy realized something profound. The hospital's reliance on technology had created a generation of nurses who were skilled but not wise. They could follow digital protocols perfectly, but couldn't adapt when systems failed. But the crisis wasn't over. Dr. Martinez's voice came over the intercom, requesting Dorothy's immediate return to the emergency department. The trauma patients were deteriorating, and the young staff couldn't maintain the coordination Dorothy had established. Dorothy faced another impossible decision. Mrs. Patterson was stable but still critical. Leaving might mean losing her, but the trauma patients would certainly die without proper coordination. Lives hung in the balance of Dorothy's choice. She made a decision that revealed her true character. Dorothy called Jennifer and demanded that someone senior stay with Mrs. Patterson. She was returning to the emergency department because that's where she could save the most lives. Jennifer was stunned. After treating Dorothy with disrespect all day, the elderly nurse was still prioritizing hospital needs over personal feelings. It was a level of professionalism that Jennifer had never witnessed. Dorothy returned to find the emergency department in worse chaos. Without her coordination, communication had broken down completely. Dr. Martinez looked relieved when he saw her. The trauma patients needed immediate surgery, but operating room schedules were managed by computer systems that remained down. But then came the moment that would define Dorothy's legacy. The youngest trauma patient, a 7-year-old girl, went into cardiac arrest. The pediatric team was delayed due to the computer crisis. Without immediate intervention, the child would die. Dorothy stepped into her role as crisis coordinator. With renewed authority, she manually organized surgical schedules, coordinated patient transfers, and managed resource allocation using knowledge accumulated over decades. Her mind became the hospital's functioning computer system. Dorothy didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and began directing the child's cardiac resuscitation. Her hands moved with precision born from thousands of similar emergencies. She called out medication dosages, coordinated chest compressions, and managed the entire response. Dr. Martinez caught Dorothy's eye. He knew she had the experience to save this child, but doing so would violate hospital policy. If anything went wrong, both their careers would be destroyed. The liability was enormous. Dorothy looked at the heart monitor showing dangerous rhythms. She had seen this exact situation countless times during her career, but hospital protocol required a pediatric specialist to handle child cardiac emergencies. Dorothy wasn't technically qualified. The child's heart rhythm stabilized. Color returned to her small face. Dorothy's intervention had saved a life that hospital bureaucracy might have lost. Dr. Martinez watched in awe as Dorothy demonstrated why experience couldn't be replaced by technology. But the night's challenges weren't finished. The computer system failure had affected more than just patient records. Laboratory results couldn't be processed digitally. Medication orders couldn't be verified automatically. The entire hospital was operating in technological darkness. Dorothy realized this was bigger than one crisis. The hospital needed someone who could function without digital support. Someone who remembered how medicine worked before computers existed. Someone exactly like her. Young nurses who had dismissed Dorothy as outdated now watched her in amazement. She was accomplishing things they couldn't imagine without computer assistance. Skills they had never learned were saving lives around them. She took charge of manual systems throughout the hospital. Dorothy organized paper-based patient tracking, coordinated verbal communication between departments, and established backup protocols that bypassed failed technology. Her experience became the hospital's lifeline. As dawn approached, the computer systems slowly came back online. The crisis was ending, but its impact would last forever. Dorothy had proven that human expertise couldn't be replaced by technology. Her knowledge had literally kept the hospital functioning. But Dorothy surprised everyone with her response. She told Dr. Martinez that her decision to retire remained unchanged. However, she proposed something that would transform the hospital's approach to nursing education. Dorothy suggested establishing a mentorship program where experienced nurses would train younger staff in manual skills and crisis management. Technology was valuable, but human wisdom was irreplaceable. The hospital needed both. Dr. Martinez approached Dorothy as she completed her final patient rounds. He told her that word of her performance had reached hospital administration. The board of directors wanted to meet with her immediately. Her retirement was being reconsidered. The hospital administration offered Dorothy a consulting position, teaching crisis management and manual medical skills. They realized that forcing her into retirement had nearly cost lives. Her knowledge was too valuable to lose. Dorothy accepted the apology gracefully. She told Jennifer that wisdom came with experience, and everyone had to start somewhere. But respect for experience should never be forgotten in the pursuit of modernization. Jennifer approached Dorothy with tears in her eyes. She apologized for treating Dorothy with disrespect and admitted she had been wrong. Dorothy's performance during the crisis had shown Jennifer how much she still needed to learn.